Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by Pat Flynn and his team at SPI, or Smart Passive Income. I am often asked questions about how I do all the things I do, whether it be this podcast, our cohort-based courses, or just structuring my business. Well, Pat has been a great inspiration to me, and I benefit greatly from being part of his community, SPI Pro, and from the SPI courses and workshops they offer. We are including a link in the show notes where you too can apply to be a part of SPI Pro or take advantage of their amazing courses and workshops. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honoured today to be joined by Roberta Whitney Hughes. Roberta is the founder of PeaceFull Living. That's peaceful with an F-U-L-L, and that might give you a hint as to what her purpose in life is. She's also the lead instructor at PeaceFull Living TV, which will be something that we discuss today as well. And she helps people to redefine their relationship with stress. And the topics we're going to go through today will involve stress, but we're also going to talk about that desire for authenticity and showing up as your authentic self every day. So, Roberta, without any further ado, please tell us a little bit more about your background and what led you to be with us today.
I don't know how far back you would like me to go. I'll try not to go too far back. I grew up in Arizona and married someone that was in the Air Force and traveled mostly the Western United States. And during that time, I had graduated from college. I got my degree in journalism and public relations. But moving all of the time, I was looking for something that I could do as we moved around. So I went through yoga certification, and that became my lifeline for the rest of my life and has been a blueprint for everything that I've done that has led me to where I am now.
Yeah, very good, Roberta. Now, so yoga is a big part of what you do and what I've seen in PeaceFull Living for sure. Tell us a little bit more about the background even before that. So what about your upbringing and your what were your interests as a young person, etc.?
So I grew up in Southeast Arizona. My father is African American. He had enlisted in the Army right out of high school. And my mother is Serbian. So they met overseas. My mother was living in Germany and my father was stationed in Germany, and they met, came back to the United States and settled down in one place. And I was about 5 years old at that time when they moved to Arizona. And I grew up there my whole life, about 45 minutes from the border. And looking at me, most people imagined that I was Hispanic. They didn't realize that I had a Black father and a white mother.
Okay, that's interesting. So what did you learn about society and what did you learn about yourself through that experience?
So at the beginning, as a little girl, a 5-year-old little girl, I don't think I really thought about being different. And then once I entered grade school, even though we lived in a melting pot, there were many different cultures because of the Army. But most of the families were Asian and white or Black, all white, all Hispanic. I noticed probably around the second grade that I was only one of the only people that was like me. And that was a little challenging. I felt not because of what other people would say. until one teacher pointed it out to me in a standardized test environment that we had to kind of classify ourselves based on our race.
Yeah, I read this in your blog. That's a really interesting situation. And all of these kind of, whether they be government forms, school forms or whatever, there's always these questions about, who do you identify yourself as? Do you identify yourself as Caucasian, as Asian, as Latino, or in Australia, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander? There's always this desire for people to identify themselves as something. Why do you think that's important?
I think, when I was a little girl, I was born in 1973. So at that time, I feel like they gathered information to make assessments on what people needed, how to set up demographics, how to identify different populations of people. As a little girl, you don't really understand that. And my first key that I was different came from a teacher who happened to be a Caucasian woman. And we had to choose one race in our standardized testing. And I kept looking at all of the choices, and it was hard for me to pick only one because that wasn't who I was. And I remember raising my hand, and I loved this teacher. I trusted her. And I asked her, I said, can I choose two? And she said, no. She said, you have to pick one. And in the state of Arizona, if you're Black, you're Black, any percentage. And so hearing that as an 8-year-old little girl really felt disheartening and like I was separate now, like I couldn't really own my whole full self.
Yeah, I can imagine that dilemma right there. As an 8-year-old, I can imagine that dilemma no matter what age you are. This challenge to pigeonhole yourself around who you are and identify. And it doesn't just have to be your racial heritage or the way that you are raised, et cetera, et cetera. It could be anything towards sexual orientation, et cetera. And I'm just scratching my head right now, Roberta, and it's International Women's Day this week, and we're celebrating women all this month. And I'm just scratching my head as to why even have those things on the form anymore. What are your thoughts on that?
I still don't know the reason for needing to know that information. My hope would be that it's to create diversity and understanding and acceptance. That the more you know about how a person identifies themselves, perhaps the more connected you could be. That's how I approach the questions now. And I have noticed, especially more recently, that those classifications are becoming more inclusive. So now I can choose that I'm multiracial, or I can choose more than one. I can say Black and white. So I feel like I can now include all of me rather than just a part of me. And I've noticed with people and their sexuality and what they resonate with in terms of their sexuality, they can now identify that on these forms. So my hope is that it's to gather more information about a person to feel that you're meeting them where they are.
Yeah, good, Roberta. I like that perspective. And I do see a shift in the world, that we are getting to the point where we are allowing people to be all of me, which was the words that you used there. But we've still got a long way to go. And it's about, for me, it's about striving that balance between respecting I'll change the word, celebrating someone's background and heritage and who they are, at the same time as not allowing it to become any form of discrimination, to a drive for both equality and equity. And those two terms are slightly different, and we want to have an equitable world for sure. So, so celebrating who they are, but not in any discriminatory way or allowing discrimination to creep in the way that's done. I feel like there's something deeper here, and we'll probably come back to this when we circle back to authenticity later and around this concept of identity, Roberta. I want to change gears a little bit now for a while. Where did the love of yoga come from?
The love of yoga actually came in college. I was going to school for journalism. I actually started off as a business major, and then I was not doing well in any of my business classes. I was doing really well in my English classes. So I thought about becoming an English major, but literature was not something that brought me joy. Sitting and reading really long pieces of literature because I had to was not something that I wanted to do. So I found the journalism college, and that just felt like home to me. But as one of our elective credits, you had to take some type of a PE or movement class, and they offered yoga. And that was the first yoga class I had ever taken. My teacher was the most kind-hearted, warm person that I had ever met. She had the bluest of blue eyes, and her voice was just beautiful, almost poetic in anything she would say. And I remember each time I walked out of that class just feeling grounded, feeling peaceful. And even my friends would say, "You always look so happy when you come out of yoga." And that's how it started for me. I continued to take classes from her even after that semester. I took classes from her off campus, and it became a part of my life.
I have to share with you here, Roberta, and for those that are listening to the audio podcast, your face completely lit up when you spoke about her. So it's an interesting thing there. I see two things. I see, yes, clearly you love yoga or it would not have been a success, but I'm also seeing this impact that this inspirational person has had on your life, and your whole kind of body language shifted when you were talking about it, which is kind of really interesting. Now, when some people talk about yoga, I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush here at all, because many people do understand it's deeper than this. When some people think about yoga, they think about yoga outfits and leisure wear or whatever, and on a yoga mat and stretching. But it's much more than that. Tell us more about why yoga is important to you and what it means that's more than just the physical aspect.
Sure. So I grew up Eastern Orthodox. I'm a Christian, and in our church service, it was led in Greek, except for when our priest would come to our small town every so often. But it was very ritualistic. It was the same service week after week. And in that experience, I too felt grounded. I felt connected. I felt at peace. And it was the ritual of the practice that had me feeling closer to God, closer to myself. And for me, that is what my yoga practice has become. When I start to move and breathe and get still, it brings me closer to God.
You use the word grounded. I want to explore that a bit further. What does grounded mean for you, Roberta?
Grounded means that I am connected to my heart, I am connected to my body, and more separate from my ego. Most of the time when we get busy doing things, we really are operating from our brains. We're on go mode. We're not necessarily thinking about what we're doing. We're just taking action. Being grounded for me means that I'm connected, I'm aware, I am in my body.
Okay, and you brought up the word peace, and your business is PeaceFull Living TV, and FULL is in there. So tell us what peaceful means to you.
When I came up with the name, it was very organic. For years, anytime I signed an email, it was Peaceful Wishes with one L. And when I was thinking of a good business name, a friend of mine said you should use something like you sign your emails because that really just makes me feel peaceful. And I thought, what would it be like to have a life full of peace? What would that even feel like? And that was my motivation for the business name, to do things that lead us towards a more peaceful state, even if it's just little sprinkles throughout the day.
Okay, so the story that I'm hearing here, or the building up, is that through yoga, you feel grounded, you feel connected to yourself, and in doing so, you're generating your life in a way that is full of peace. Is that a good reflection there, Roberta?
I would say that's the ideal. I'm always moving towards that ideal. And I don't know that any of us will ever become perfect at it. I think it's a practice and it is evasive. It's not that you follow the rules and you feel peaceful. You kind of stumble into it and then it's gone. Or you move into it intentionally, but then something else moves in. So it's a very fluid experience.
There's a close analogy there to leadership, Roberta. I need to bring that up right now. We are the Leadership Project, and we're here to inspire leaders to challenge the status quo and to educate them on what it means to be a leader. And what I'm hearing from you is something like yoga and being grounded and living a life full of peace and being peaceful is not a script. And it's not something you just do one day and one day you just master it. It's something that you must work on every day. And leadership is the same. Leadership is not a script. You need to adapt and adjust to different situations and different people. If you're going to inspire them, you need to take the time to get to know each individual. And leadership is something that you must work on every day. So I see some instant parallels there. So Roberta, a lot of people use yoga in a way to manage their stress. And you've recently written a great blog article about redefining people's relationship with stress. Tell us what that means to you.
So the title of the blog is called Making Friends with Stress. And when you think about this idea, it almost seems impossible or even absurd. Like, how can you make friends with your stress? And through my years of yoga practice, I have learned that the more I can make friends with all of the parts of myself, the more familiar I become with them, and the less held down or held back I am by them. So when we think about developing a healthy relationship with stress, first we need to get to know it. Just like if a neighbor moves in next door, you need to get to know that person so that you can interact with them in a positive way. Our stress is no different. If we don't understand it and know it, we don't have the ability to interact with it in a healthy way. It kind of has us under its foot. So when you develop that relationship, get to know what causes stress in your life and get to know how you respond to stress. For each of us, that is different. Some people might get jittery hands or they might start to sweat more. Some people might have a racing heart or speak really quickly if they're nervous or afraid. So getting to learn your responses to those symptoms of stress is really helpful so that you can start to become a little more friendly with them and alter those behaviors, alter the things that do provide stress symptoms in your life.
So I'm hearing a lot there, Roberta, about self-awareness. If I can summarize it back to you and let me know what you think, I'm hearing that having that awareness that everyone has stress, right? So being aware that stress is there, having the self-awareness to know what your triggers are. What are the triggers that put you into a stressful situation? And what are the symptoms that you might have, which might be very different to the person next to you, but understanding your own symptoms and signs of when stress is occurring, and then being ready with some ways to make that stress somehow work for you instead of work against you. Is that a good summary?
Yes. And not only to make it work for you, but to be able to manage it. So over time, the more awareness you have, you'll start to be able to manage it before it even happens. If you know you're going into a situation where your stress symptoms become high, what can you do before you go into that situation to help bring your response down so that you're not as triggered or as highly triggered as you might normally be?
Yeah, good one. So preparation might be a good one, so that you are mentally prepared for whatever that situation is. When do you think stress can be a positive?
I think stress is helpful when we need to perform, when we need to execute certain things, when the risk is high, because that stress response puts us in action mode. It puts us in that flight or fight response. So our energy goes up, our response time is quick, and we're able to take action. All of those things can be useful, especially in leadership and in big companies when you need to make a presentation, you need to close a deal that's important to the business, important to the company. Maybe you're interviewing for a new position. Stress can be good in all of those situations as long as you then have tools to recover from the stress after the situation is over.
I'm seeing some parallels here with the concept of comfort zone in some respects, right? So if you stay within your comfort zone all the time, nothing really ever happens, no action, etc. It's on the very edge of your comfort zone or just beyond it is where great things happen. But when you go too far, that's when it can be quite debilitating. So stress, when you let it compound, when you let it snowball, when you don't have ways of managing your stress, of course it will get debilitating. And I think everyone listening to the show needs to be aware of their stress signals and their stress cues and making sure that it doesn't get to that debilitating point. But in some respects, when you say make friends with stress, being able to push yourself a little bit just outside your comfort zone where great things happen. What are your thoughts on that parallel?
I love that you brought that up because I actually teach this in my yoga classes. I teach a style of yoga called yin yoga, and they're passive postures that we stay in for 5 minutes each, which can sound like a long time, but it really gives you the opportunity to develop the self-awareness of how you respond to stress. So we're putting stress on the physical body. And I always say to keep your barometer just right. So if you pull away and it becomes boring, your mind checks out, starts thinking about your grocery list, something other than what you're doing. If you push too deep, the body really responds to that stress. It gets triggered. The muscles tighten and tense. The brain usually becomes really negative in its feedback, and it takes you into this miserable suffering experience. So if you can regulate and get the barometer to where the stress is just enough for you to explore it, get to know it, be with it without reacting to it, it will transform how you approach almost anything in your life.
Yeah, that's a wonderful summary there, Roberta. Thank you for sharing that. And I think all of us in all aspects of our life can learn from that. Nothing changes if we don't push ourselves just that little bit. So yeah, really good, Roberta. Thank you. So Roberta, before you spoke about having yoga as a way to connect to yourself, tell us more about what that means to you.
I'll share a story. When I was a young mother, my oldest is now 23, my youngest is 19. So when my youngest was 18 months old, I had weaned him and chosen to take a 4-day silent yoga retreat. And I had taken some classes from the instructor. I was really excited. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And as a young mother, I was really in the role of motherhood, being a mom, being a wife, being the person that supported my children. And we lived far away from family. So oftentimes I was all by myself. But my mother flew out, made it possible for me to go to this retreat. And 4 days of silence was an opportunity to only be with myself. And as a young mother, that sounded really exciting, but it was probably the hardest 4 days of my life. Once all of the things that I normally did to keep me busy and to keep me less aware of myself were gone, they all came flooding in. And it was an opportunity for me to really look at who I was and how I wanted to show up in life. So by the time I left the retreat and went back, I felt like I was a more present mother because I was more present for myself. I was more connected to my sense of self rather than being in the busyness of life.
That's a powerful experience that you've been through there. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that's a good segue to lead us to the key topic for today. When people get surveyed about what are the attributes that they look for in great leaders, one of the most common answers is authenticity. What does authenticity mean to you, Roberta?
Authenticity to me means that you lead more from your heart than you do from your head, that you understand who you are in the world, and you have a desire to connect with and meet others where they are in the world. Not all of us are the same, but we all have the desire to be seen, heard, and understood. And you first need to be able to see, hear, and understand yourself before you can offer that to anybody.
So the first step, once again, becomes awareness, is what I'm hearing. And I'm following a thread here that you are using yoga to connect to yourself. When you connect yourself, you can become more aware of who you really are so that you can then show up as your authentic self. How does that sit with you?
That's exactly it. And with authenticity, I wrote down 3 A's. Awareness is the first, acceptance is the second, and then acknowledgement is the third.
Let's go to this acceptance part. Another blog that I read from you, and your blog is just outstanding, by the way, and the audience should definitely take a look at it. Some wonderful gems in there. Another one that you wrote recently, struggling to love yourself. Tell us about this acceptance, and there are people out there that find self-love, self-care. We'll start with self-love. They find self-love difficult. Why do you think that is?
I think for most of us, especially women, since we are celebrating International Women's Day this month, we define ourselves based on all of the things we hear about ourselves from other people. And when you fill your head with other people's opinions, it's really hard to love yourself and accept yourself, because sometimes what people say is not the kindest thing. And I think as we grow up as women trying to meet the standards of perfection, we develop our sense of self based on these comments, and then we add our own in. So as we become adults, now we're adding our own negative thinking and negative thoughts on top of what other people have said about us. So we have this whole past that kind of weighs us down and holds us back and keeps us from really accepting who we are and getting to know who we are.
So starting with thinking about the opinions of others, for sure. And you mentioned ones that are expressed by others. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then you're saying that it builds and you start telling stories about yourself, and a bit of self-actualization, but not necessarily in a positive way. So start telling stories about yourself, about I'm not good enough, et cetera, et cetera. How much of it is interpretation? So my point I was making before, or I was leading towards, was that you said that people don't always say nice things, and that is a very true statement, how much of it is actually just perception of what other people think? What role does that play?
This is a great question because I have been exploring in all relationships, what is my part and what is the other person's part? And then what is our part together that's connected? I come with my own set of thoughts, ideas, and opinions. So the way I hear something may not be the way the other person means it. And they come with their own thoughts, ideas, opinions. And what I say may be interpreted differently than I mean it. So then to have that common thread of connection through communication and being willing to ask a question, being willing to clarify. You do this so well. You clarify, you make sure that you understand before you move on to the next thing. That is a useful tool and a phenomenal skill to help bring people into a place where it's not only their own limiting beliefs that are stopping them from making progress because they're taking the time to work through it to create that place of understanding.
Yeah, for me, where this comes from, and by the way, I'm not perfect at this, but it's something I practice every day and I look to get better and better at it. To me, assumptions are dangerous. Assumptions about what someone else likes and dislikes without testing that assumption, and assumptions about what someone else is thinking is really dangerous, and that's why I look to test it. Do you mind giving me a little bit of license here? I want to share one of my favourite stories about this topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I'd love your reflection on the story immediately after. So this couple has been married for 30 years, and every morning they bake their own bread. They started out doing it in their oven. Now they've got one of those fancy bread makers, and one of the things they love to do every morning is to wake up in the house with that aroma that's wafting through the house of the fresh bread as it's been made in the bread maker. And then the husband every morning will get out the loaf of bread and will cut off the crusty end of the bread and put it on a plate and give it to his wife with a beaming smile on his face every day for 30 years. And eventually the wife just completely loses it and said, "That's it. I've had enough. I want a divorce. Every day for 30 years, you've given me the crusty, rough, hard end of the bread. Why do you do this to me?" And the husband just pauses and looks with disbelief on his face and says, "But that's the best bit." What's your reflection of that story?
For him, he was giving her the best part. He was giving her a gift, but they never communicated about that. So she was receiving something that she thought was the worst part. And in his mind, he was gifting her the best part. So where she thought he was being unkind and isolating, he was trying to honor her and show love and care by giving her his favorite part. So had 30 years ago, they had this conversation of what is your favorite part of the bread, they may have done things a lot differently. She may have actually enjoyed that crusty part rather than thinking it was the worst part of the bread. And maybe they would have shared it and then enjoyed another piece together. So not making an assumption allows you to grow in relationship with somebody else.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great summary, Roberta. And then I want to come back to this perception that others have of people. It is International Women's Day here. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I hope I do not offend anyone by this story. I'm just trying to illustrate something, and I don't want to have any kind of implicit bias here. It's just a story I've heard before, and I want to reshare it. And that is that when, let's say that a woman is walking on the beach in her bikini or a swimsuit, whatever the case may be, what I've heard from multiple women is that the whole time they're walking down the beach, they're wondering and worrying about what people think about them, right? So could call it body image, call it whatever. The whole time they're thinking, what do people think of me? Do I have too much cellulite? Do I do this? Do I do that? Et cetera, et cetera. And what's really happening is when those other people were walking past, they're all just going, oh, there goes a woman in a swimsuit. That's it, right? So yes, people say nasty things. But how much of it is just playing in our mind where we're worried about what other people are thinking when we don't know for sure if they're really thinking those things or not? What are your thoughts on that?
This is a great place to explore how we value ourselves and whether we value ourselves based on all of the things that come our way. We gain information through the things that we see on social media, through things that we see on the television screen, through things that we read. Magazines are coming to be more of a thing of the past, but when I was growing up, flipping through a magazine, you just gather all of this information on what beauty is or what a gorgeous body on the beach would look like. And I would argue that most women who are feeling self-conscious, it's because those thoughts have become limiting beliefs in their head. They're there without them even realizing it. And it is possible to start to transform your way of thinking. And I would also argue women who you might look at and think have a lot of confidence are definitely still thinking those same things about themselves. They're looking at somebody else who has prettier this or less cellulite or whatever it is that you're measuring. You can always find someone who you think is better than you. You can always find someone who you think is worse off than you. And that's not just for physical appearance, it's for all things. And this definitely goes into the place of leadership. We can look at someone who has a role that we really covet and want for ourselves. And then we can look at someone who is maybe working in the mailroom doing what we might consider not a very difficult job, but that person in the mailroom might be very fulfilled. It might be the job that they love, where the person that we're looking up to, that we want that role, is really struggling with stress, with insomnia, with anxiety, with mental health things that are not allowing them to have a great quality of life. So we could take it anywhere from that example of walking on the beach and having limiting beliefs to any role that you do in life.
Yeah, good, Roberta. I love that transition that you did there. Any advice that you have out there that might, for people that are maybe doing this, they're comparing themselves to others, they have limiting beliefs, they're reducing their self-worth. Any advice that you can give on how people can start to break that pattern?
I have been working on this with my boys. So I'm a mother of 2 grown boys, and then I'm also a stepmother of 2 younger boys. And I want to point out, between male and female, limiting beliefs exist equally from what I have experienced as a mother. Teaching my boys that comparing themselves to others will only keep them feeling devalued and limited. And teaching anyone that I would come into contact with, when you're looking outside of yourself to measure your self-worth, you're always going to come out feeling like you weren't good enough, like you didn't measure up. So rather than letting experiences and awards determine how you feel about yourself, you need a way to find that for yourself, regardless of conditions.
So self-validation as part of self-love and not having it being an externalization, maybe an internalization. What's your reflection to that?
So I'll share a story if you don't mind.
Please, yeah.
Right out of high school, I decided to do pageants, and it was a surprise to my parents, but we lived in a very small town, and it was the biggest resource for scholarship money in our town. And I really looked up to the young women who had won the title of Miss Sierra Vista, this little hometown pageant. And right out of high school. I was 17 years old still. I competed, did horribly, and then kind of got the bug, like I really wanted to earn this title. So it took me 3 years. And I remember going through that process and thinking, once I get this title, I'm going to feel good about myself. I'm going to think I'm beautiful. The boys that I can't get their attention, they're going to want my attention. Like I thought it was going to transform my whole life. And I remember laying in my bed that night after I had won, and I just realized I didn't feel any different. No different at all. And I laid awake most of the night. I didn't go to sleep probably until 5 o'clock that morning.
Wow.
Just waiting and wondering, when was I going to feel different about myself? And it never happened.
So what I take away from that, Roberta, is that strive for external validation is not fulfilling. It's when you can be internally validated that you are enough, that it really, that's when joy and fulfillment starts coming through. It is something that people crave still, external validation. And if you're there and you can help someone see themselves, right, help them to uncover their own superpowers, their own strengths, because not everyone can see themselves. It's and I'm not talking about looking in the mirror here. I'm talking about seeing their authentic self. Not everyone can see it. So if there is someone in your life that you think is amazing and they are not seeing it, by all means help them. But when the breakthrough comes through is when they start seeing themselves, which is that awareness and acceptance. All right, so we had the triple A. So we've been through awareness, we've been through acceptance. What's next, Roberta?
Acknowledgement.
So tell me what that means.
Acknowledgement of who you are in the world and being absolutely okay with who you are and not feeling like you have to be different in order to succeed, in order to get the job, in order to be a good leader, in order to be a good human being. That we all come with our experiences and we all come with parts of ourselves that are easy and lovable, and then parts of ourselves that are more challenging and hard to love. But if you think about how a parent loves a child, how unconditional that is, when we can have the same relationship with ourselves through self-love, we can really achieve anything that we want.
I'm seeing an interesting thing here about being self-critical. So bear with me for a moment. So we've been through awareness, we've been through acceptance, we're now in acknowledgement. One of the practices that I get all of my clients to do is a thing called self-reflection. And at the end of each day, asking yourselves a bunch of 5 questions, but 2 of them, I'll just stick with 2 of them. What went well today and what didn't go well today? There's also practices like Ikigai, where we get people to talk about what they love doing and what they're good at. Many people struggle to own what they're good at. Something holds them back. And to the exercise of the self-reflection, when we say what went well today and what didn't go well today, they're usually very quick to be able to say what didn't go well, but not taking credit for the things that did go well. Why do you think that is? What holds people back, that they're so critical on themselves that they can find their flaws, they find it difficult to find their strengths?
I think it's how we are wired, and I think the way we live our lives supports the process of looking for how we can be better. I was raised to feel that I could do anything that I wanted to do as long as I put my mind to it, and that was really wonderful. But as an adult woman, I continuously look for, where can I improve? How can it be better? So I have actually stopped identifying for myself what didn't go well, because like you said, I could pick a long list of things. So at the end of the day, I only write down the things that I did well. And this practice is difficult because I can sometimes sit there and just stare at the blank page. But once you think of one, then you can start to let the flow come. And I transitioned actually when I was doing college visits with my youngest son. We did one college visit, and the young girl who led the tour was maybe 19 or 20. And she said to us, my teacher tells us that we have to share our strengths. So she pulled out her cell phone and she said, I've been making a list and I'm going to tell you what my strengths are. And I thought that was the most phenomenal thing. What a gift for this young woman to be able to look at that list on her cell phone as a reminder over and over and over again. So I've actually started this practice. I keep a list of my strengths. Whenever I realize I did something well, I just put that down in my notes. And when I start to have limiting thoughts, limiting beliefs, feeling like a failure, all of those things, I can pull it out and remind myself that's not all of who I am. I'm also all of these strengths.
I love that. And we've got another A now, which is affirmation, right? So with that acknowledgement, affirming to yourself that you do have wonderful strengths. I'll share a thought with you and see what you think. So I think where some of this comes from, I consider myself to be a very humble person, and yet I know what I'm good at. Now, I've got self-awareness of where my strengths are. What holds a lot of people back, including myself, about telling the world about those strengths is that you don't want to come across as immodest or not having humility. For me, I think the secret to all of this could be that you get out there and don't be shy about telling the world your gifts. Tell people about what you are good at, and where humility comes through is to then also equally stick up the hand and go, well, yeah, I'm good at that, but I'm not actually very good at this. So for me, I'm good at public speaking, I'm good at communication, I'm good at listening to people, all of these things. My wife will tell you I'm not good at remembering to take the garbage out. I'm not good at, there's all kinds of things that I'm not good at, and I can stick up my hand and be very humble about that. And in business as well, I'm good at vision, I'm good at direction, I'm good at all of these things, but there's all kinds of things that I'm not good at, and I surround myself with people that can make up for the things that I'm not good at. So for me, the push for humility and the push for modesty makes people back off a little bit and not own their gifts. Whereas what we want them to do to turn up as their authentic self is to own those things that they're wonderful at. Tell people what your strengths are, but to equally be humble and have humility to admit when, well, actually that's not my strength and I don't know the answer to that question, et cetera, et cetera. What's your reflection on that?
I love that you shared so authentically about that. I think for men not wanting to feel like they're too assertive or too confident is a barometer that you're probably aware of. With women, when a woman becomes assertive, it almost becomes unacceptable. So to be able to say, these are my strengths, this is what I do well, in a way that doesn't feel offensive or too assertive, for both men and women, that's important. And this really does come back to the place of self-awareness. How can you share your gifts without having them feel imposed on another person? And how can you ask for help and admit the things that you're not so good at, that you could use support with? So it allows for that conversation of helping and sharing.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. That's a really interesting one. It makes me think of a commercial I've seen from Pantene, and I'll put this in the show notes and I'll share it with you afterwards, Roberta. And it goes through a day in the life of a woman and a man in different situations. And underneath, it's got all of these different labels. So when the man is standing up and giving a great speech and all this kind of stuff, it's like assertive, I think was the word. And when the woman is up there doing the same thing, bossy. There is an element of perception out there, and some of those biases that come in. They're unfair, but it's foolish to not think that they exist right now. So, and of course, we want to break the bias. That's the theme of International Women's Day this year, is to break the bias. But acknowledging that bias actually exists is part of having us to do that. So thank you for sharing that perspective from a woman's view about this confidence and not wanting to be seen as overconfident because of the perceptions that can happen for that. Thank you for sharing that. All right,
You're welcome.
So coming back to this wanting to show up as your authentic self, what's the positive impact that can come from that? So when you master the AAA and you do show up as your authentic self, what's the positive impact that comes from that, Roberta?
It's positive not only for you, but for the people around you. So you have more of an ability to manage your feelings, your expectations, your requests, your actions when you come from a place of authenticity. If you're coming into a situation trying to be someone other than who you are, it's going to interfere with the flow of energy, both for you and for the people who are receiving it. Mm. So authenticity allows you to create more community, to create a healthier relationship, and to invite others in.
What role do you think congruence plays in that? So you said a disruption of energy. You didn't use those exact words, but it was close to it. So when you don't show up as your authentic self, that there's some kind of disruption of energy for you and for the people that you're engaging with. Tell us more about that.
So an example might be that you've applied for a job and you've read the job description, and maybe you've researched other people who are doing a similar role, and you're so well prepared, you think you have all of the answers of what this role requires. You know that you're qualified, but then you go into it trying to be all of these things that you've read about, heard about, seen, and there's no reflection of you in that. I think most companies are looking for leaders who are willing to step out as themselves and to lead in a way that would be inspiring, to be connected to the work, but also able to connect to people and show them the way and inspire them to lead in their own right.
There's some powerful things there, Roberta, I want to play back to you. I think it's a really important message that you're sharing here. The first one I'm interpreting, by the way, so please correct me if I misinterpret something. The first one is when you do show up as your authentic self, that you just get to be yourself. And if you're not there trying to pretend to be someone else, that you can be quite at ease with yourself. And playing that role where you're playing the role that you think others are expecting of you can be quite exhausting, right? So you're no longer just turning up as yourself. What I'm hearing there as a leader, we want people to turn up as their authentic self. And then when they do, it somehow gives a license to others that they can relax and they can show up as their authentic self if the leader is doing it. Is that a fair reflection?
Yes, it brings the energy into a place of balance where it feels more inviting and welcoming rather than being directed only one way towards the job, towards the performance, towards the expectation. It brings that human connection into play when we can move from authenticity.
Mm. And I think, what about the opposite then? So when someone turns up inauthentic, what's the impact to the team at that point?
Usually, I can only speak from my place of being a teacher. So I'll use this example. When I first started teaching yoga, I would prepare by researching the perfect sequences, teachers that I was inspired by. And then I would show up with my list of things and I would be disconnected from myself and only connected to what I created on paper. And trying to deliver that felt awkward for me. And I could see in the room that it was not being received by the students. And so they probably left thinking I wasn't a good teacher. It wasn't a great class. They didn't have a good experience. And it's all because I had this barricade between myself and what I was trying to offer. And it didn't allow that intimacy. Intimacy is important in all relationships, especially in leadership. If you are leading a group of people by only telling them what to do and dictating from the notes that you have on your paper, there's no inspiration there. There's no ability to interact, to connect, to be feeling like you're part of a whole rather than someone who needs to just be in charge of their one part.
Yeah, well said. And that kind of feeling that you're talking about with those students when someone is not being themselves, it doesn't feel right. There's something that in you notice it. And that's why I brought up congruence before. When someone is incongruent with what is their true self, people notice, people pick up on it. They pick up on it very quickly and it just feels off and the results then are impacted by it. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Roberta. I want to summarize a few things back and draw us to a conclusion. So this desire, we all want people, we want leaders to turn up as their authentic self. This is a common answer that we hear. We all want the space to be able to turn up as our authentic self. And when we don't do so, it's exhausting. And Roberta has shared with us this concept here today about starting with awareness, getting to acceptance, and then getting to acknowledgement, and getting to that place where you are comfortable in your own skin to be able to get there in the workplace and show up every day as your authentic self. It's better for you because it's less exhausting, where you're not playing a role anymore. You're just being yourself. You are enough and you're showing up as your authentic self. And then everyone else benefits because you're congruent in your energy and everything seems in place and in line. And it gives other people the license that they can show up as their authentic self. And when they do, they can relax and they can be less exhausted because they realize, okay, this is a safe place. I can show up as myself, that I am enough and I'm seen as enough. How is that for a summary for you, Roberta, for today?
That summarizes things nicely. I would like to add, when we think of leadership, we're always looking upward. And I think leadership is a cohesive experience. Every person is a leader in their own right. So if you're feeling uninspired or you aren't being led the way that you need to be led to be your authentic self, advocate for your needs, advocate for how you can be the best version of yourself and perform at the best version of yourself. What are your needs?
Yeah, well said. And everyone, leadership is not a rank. It can come from anywhere, including yourself. And be the change that you want to see in the world. Be the change that you want to see in your team, in your organization. That becomes quite infectious. If you turn up as your authentic self, others will relax and do the same. Whether you're the senior leader or just a member of the team, you will be leading in that way. So yeah, well said, Roberta. All right, that probably draws us nicely to a close, Roberta. I'd like to go into our rapid round. So the first thing I want to ask you, very interesting with your background, what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I wish I knew that my sense of self, my sense of feeling whole and complete was always there. It was always there to be available and to be seen. I just needed to see it.
Oh, very well said. Nice advice for everyone as well. What's your favorite book?
It's a very little book by Pema Chodron, and it's called Making Peace in Times of War. And this would be an excellent leadership book because it's a very small book. It's an easy read, everything she talks about in this book is similar to what we've been discussing today. The war within ourselves is really what creates suffering. And when you can make friends with it, when you can have a healthy relationship with it, it really does transform how you feel in all of your roles in life.
The war within ourselves is what creates suffering. That's really powerful. I've not heard of that book. I'm going to look into that. That sounds like a really good read. Thank you. What's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote comes from one of my yoga teachers, Eric Schiffman. And during our teacher training, he would say, "Bloom into the perfection of you." And that quote has been with me since I took my training in 2002. So
I love it. Bloom into the perfection of you. I really love that, Roberta. Thank you so much for sharing that. And finally, I know that the audience is going to be intrigued by some of the things that you've shared today. If people want to know more about PeaceFull Living and to get in contact with you to help them on their own journeys towards finding their authentic self and finding a life full of peace, how do they get in contact with you, Roberta?
I have a website, PeaceFull, and it is FULL living.com. And on the website, I have my blog. I have PeaceFull Living TV, which is an on-demand library that offers yoga and meditation and Pilates instruction. And I'm also on Instagram at Roberta_PeaceFull Living. So every Wednesday, I offer a Wellness Wednesday tip to help people become a little more connected to themselves. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I have not been putting a lot of content on LinkedIn, but it is in my future.
All right. Thank you so much, Roberta. And I will say once again, I said it during the interview, but your blog is wonderful. So I encourage all of the audience to subscribe to Roberta's blog and go to the website. I've had a look at some of the videos as well. They're really well created, and there is a lot of benefit there for anyone that's looking to become more mindful and to find authentic peace in themselves. To please do take a look at Roberta's website. You won't regret it for sure. So thank you so much, Roberta. I've absolutely adored our conversation today. A great exploration of a very important topic. I want to really thank you and acknowledge you for your sharing today very openly with us, your insights and your wisdom and your experiences. Thank you so much, Roberta.
Thank you for having me on this show. It really was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mixbeers.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel. And you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.